All right. Can you hear me?
I hear you.
Okay. All right. Sanhedrin. Uh, Here we go. We're going to discuss, I know we're up to the second parak, um, but I wanted to discuss the previous parak. There's a couple of, well, not more than a couple. There's many, many different possible topics to talk about, obviously, because the first Mishnah spoke about so many different inyanim. So when I was giving a couple of weeks ago when I was talking, we talked about the concept of shoftim v'shotrim and rove. And the truth is, the one of the fundamental topics in understanding Sanhedrin is the source where we need, in fact, 70 from. So the Mishnah alludes to it way back in the first parak, all the way on Daf Beis. Let me just turn to it on the bottom. The Mishnah wanted to know, just open it up. The Mishnah wanted to know the source for 23, for 71. It says Sanhedrin Gedola Heitzal Shal Shivim Ve'echad, Uktana Shal Esrim V'Shloshes. So by now, we should know this, being that we've been engrossing in this for the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks, that is. We have the 23 and the 71. So the pasuk that we use for the 23 is V'shaftu ha'eda v'hitzilu ha'eda, and it's 10 and 10. And then we wanted to know where we get the concept of 71 from. So the Mishnah said, Minayin l'gdola shehi shel shivim ve'echad shenemar esfali shivim ish miziknei Yisrael umosha al gabehem. Because the pasuk says, gather me 70 of the Zakanim, and Moshe was their leader, so 70 plus 1. Rabbi Huda Omer Shivim. Rabbi Huda says it's actually 70. You have the problem, 35 verse 35. Okay, so that's a separate discussion, but right now we're talking about the source. So if you go fast forward to Daf Yud Zayin, all the way at the end of the first parak, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines from the top gives an introduction to the whole story of where we get 70 from. So the 6th line says, Tanu Rabbanan, Vayisha'aru shnei anashim b'machaneh. Okay, in order, this is like an introduction to an introduction. So in order to understand where the source in the Torah, you have to remember the story in Parshas Bahaloscha. Okay, what's the story in Parshas Bahaloscha? So let us open up a Bahaloscha, because the topic that we're going to talk about, I think gets very little fanfare, because Bahaloscha is one of those Torah portions that has a lot of different topics, and this is not one of the more famous discussions when you come to learn Parshas Bahaloscha. Right? Most parshios have 2 or 3 themes. Bahaloscha actually has the record for the most themes. I think it's 11, it may be 12, but I think there are 11 themes in Bahaloscha. And just for a little bit more trivia on Bahaloscha, Bahaloscha has the record for the most pazers in any parsha. And if you think about it, this is my personal thing. I concluded that the word pazer means scattered, right? And it's very fitting for Bahaloscha because you have many scattered themes in Parshas Bahaloscha. And when you even look at what the Gemara on Daf Yud Zayin talks about, you have to understand what the context is. Chapter 11 in Bahaloscha, just to give you a reference, talks about the Misonanim. Okay, we all remember the Misonanim. Uh, Once again, an episode where the Jews were complaining. Okay, and God didn't like it, and He set fire to the Machane. That was called Kivrot. Right, that was called Tavera. Okay, Tavera was a place where people died because of their rebelling against Moshe and against God. So they complain, right? We remember Zacharnu was Hadaga. It was so much better, right? Everybody always says it was better, right? The grass was greener in Mitzrayim. Here it's horrible here. We have no food. All of a sudden, you fast forward a little bit to Pasuk 16. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, Esfali Shivim ish mizikne Yisrael asher yadata ki hem zikne ha'am v'shotra v'lakachta usam el ohel moed v'hisyatzvu sham imach. So this really is the introduction to the story of Eldad Meidad, which the Gemara on Daf Yud Zayin is going to allude to. And why we're talking about Eldad Meidad? Because that is where the number 70 comes from, which goes back to the question of how we know 70. Okay, so just to put everything into perspective. So Pasuk Tezayin in Perek Yud Aleph in Parshas Baloscha basically says, God says, gather me 70 Zakanim, okay, Asher Yadata ki hem ziknei ha'am v'shotrav, and they shall be there with you. And the next Pasuk, okay, says v'yaradati v'dibarti imcha sham v'atzalti min haruach asher alecha v'samti alehem v'nasu itcha b'masa ha'am v'lo tisa talav adecha. Basically, Moshe, calm down, because I'm going to take these people and I will have them help you. You will not bear it alone. This is a little bit reminiscent of the Yisro speech, right? If you remember, where Yisro also said you can't do this alone. So Moshe once again was reminded that he didn't have to do it alone. He was going to have Shivim Zakanim. Okay? Now, when one looks at the Rashi on this pasuk of Esfali Shivim Ish, okay, Rashi asks the obvious question. The question is, what's going on over here? Meaning, why does Moshe all of a sudden have to gather more Zakanim? What happened to the Zakanim that we had back in Parshas Shmos before Matan Torah? Remember there were Zakanim? Right? The pasuk says in Parshas Shmos, Lech ve'asafta ez ziknei Yisrael. There was Zakanim in Parshas Shmos, and last I checked, there was Zakanim in Parshas Yisro, right by Matan Torah. It says that the Zakanim went up to Har Sinai. So what's going on? Now, why is this important? It's important because Rashi wants to know, where did these Zakanim disappear that we all of a sudden we have to go vote on 70 more Zakanim? So Rashi says, Esfali, let me just open it up. Hare tshuva l'tlonecha she'amarta lo uchal anochi levadi. Again, first of all, Rashi is addressing, why is God saying to hire or to get 70 people? Because you just were complaining a second ago, right, that I can't bear, right, all this responsibility. So now you have people to help. The Hazakenim Harishonim Heichan Hayu. Where exactly were these Zakanim that we once had? The Halof b'Mitzrayim Yashvu Imahem Shneimar Lech V'Asafta Ziknei Yisrael Ela be'Eish Tavera Mesu. So this is what Rashi is saying. You have to know the flow of the psukim in Bahaloscha, because right before talks about they were complaining, and then God destroyed people, and it seems like the Zakanim were part of this group. And Rashi says, not only did they sin over here, right, they also sinned way back in Parshas Yisro. Okay? V'zehu vayochlu vayishtu v'lo ratzah HaKadosh Baruch Hu liten avelus b'matan Torah ufaru lahem kan. Very, very important message that Rashi is saying is that in truth, these Zakanim sinned a long time ago when they transgressed something. What did they transgress? We're going to see in a second. But because they did something wrong in Parshas Yisro, they are now paying for their sins. But God didn't want to spoil the party in Matan Torah, so he let the Zakanim live all the way until the last straw, which was when they complained in Perek Yud Aleph in Bahaloscha. So now, in order to understand what their sin was in Parshas Yisro, and again, although, we got a little bit of a sidetrack over here, as I usually do, I try to explain the sources for everything. This is a very important source because I believe that this is not well known, right? So I like to capitalize when we have these sources that aren't well known to review a little bit of the Torah Shebechsav. Forget about Torah Shebaal Peh, but I think Torah Shebechsav over here needs to be looked at, because Perek 24 is the very end of Yisro. The Perek starts off by saying, "Vel Moshe Amar Ala El Hashem, Ata ve'Aaron Nadav v'Avihu v'Shiva miziknei Yisrael v'Hishtachavita merachok." So just to put things in perspective, we had Matan Torah, we had the 10 Commandments in chapter 23. Chapter 24, it goes a little bit out of order. This, by the way, is the whole discussion between Rashi and the Ramban, the big famous machlokas about what the order is in Yisro, whether it comes before Mishpatim, does it come after Mishpatim? But actually, I'm sorry, I misspoke. We're right now in Parshas Mishpatim, okay? Because even though Matan Torah was in Parshas Yisro, but there's a chapter at the end of Parshas Mishpatim, i.e. chapter 24, which actually chronologically takes place before Parshas Yisro, and Rashi makes a point. Okay, so before Matan Torah, they all go up. Okay, and it says Vishtachavite merachok, and they should bow from afar. I'm skipping. What happens? They go up, and they have korbanos. Right, Moshe sprinkles the blood. And then it says, Vaya'al, I am in verse Pasuk Tet, Vaya'al Moshe v'Aharon, Nadav v'Avihu v'Shivim miziknei Yisrael. Okay, so Moshe and Aaron go up, as well as Nadav Avihu and the Shivim Zakanim. So here we go. We have Shivim Zakanim by Matan Har Sinai. Vayir'u es Elokei Yisrael v'tachat raglav k'maseh livnar hasapir ke'etzem hashamayim l'tohar. This is probably one of the most mysterious psukim in all of Torah. I'd probably say in the top 3, or maybe top 2, together with that pasuk at the end of Parshas Bereishis, where it talks about Vayar, right? Vayar b'nei Elokim es benosa Adam, right? Where the daughters married the men. No one knows what that pasuk means. This is another pasuk that most people don't really understand. That the Zakanim saw God, whose feet were like sapphire, like the very purity of the sky, whatever that means. And again, another pasuk, we don't know what it means. God didn't raise his hand against the Atzile. Atzilim are the leaders. Okay? And they saw God, and they ate and they drank. So if you look in just, basic understanding in Rashi of what went on, Rashi says on that pasuk of Vayiru et Elokei Yisrael, so Rashi says, Nistaklu v'hitzitzu v'nischayvu misa. Okay, they looked and they gazed and they were chayav themselves misa. Ela shelo ratza HaKadosh Baruch Hu la'arbev simchas haTorah Now, who together was with the Shivim Zakanim? It says Nadav and Avihu. Again, this is a pasuk that we don't really concentrate on because it's all the way at the end of Mishpatim, and it's not really talked about that much. But if you actually look at it, it says that Nadav and Avihu were punished along with the Zakanim. But God waited and did not want to punish until a later time. So Nadav and Avihu got what they got, okay, ad Chanukas HaMishkan. Well, the Zakanim got what they got, ad Vayihi Am Kemisonim. Vativar Bam Eish Hashem Vatochal Biktzeh HaMachaneh. So they got punished much later. So that's what this pasuk in Bahaloscha, or that's what this Rashi in Bahaloscha is talking about, which is this punishment that they, in fact, got for looking. Now, we know that Nadav and Avihu were punished. The Torah doesn't give a reason, except it says Eish Zara, and I think the Gemara in Eruvin gives, I think, 6 reasons. They were Shetuya Yayin, they paskin the halacha, they whatever it was. There's 4 or 5 other reasons why they were supposedly punished, but nobody ever brings this reason. And this reason is, the original reason. So if for nothing, at least we know that Nadav and Avihu had another thing coming for them based on this. So that's why the Zakanim, right? That's why the Zakanim were punished, and we had to do a whole nother lottery, so to speak, of inaugurating more Zakanim to help out Moshe. So getting back to the Gemara in Sanhedrin, right? Let's read the beginning on Daf Yud Zayin. Okay. So, just turn to it. Vayisharu shnei anashim b'machana. Yesh omrim bekalpe nishtayru. Okay. Remember what the pasuk said in Bahaloscha? Vayisharu shnei anashim b'machana. Okay. So where is that pasuk written? It's written after the psukim that we just read. So, for example, I'm going a little bit out of order, but getting back to Bahaloscha, after those 2 psukim where God asked to Esfel Yishivim Zakanim, if you skip about 6 psukim later, it says, Vayisharu shnei anashim b'machaneh shel machar Eldad v'shem ha'shnei Meidad, v'tanach aleiham haruach v'hema b'ksuvim v'lo yatzu ha'ola v'yisnabu b'machaneh. Okay, 2 people were nisharu, they were left over, they remained in the machaneh. One was Eldad, one was Meidad, and they had the spirit was on them, okay, and they were in the ksuvim, whatever that means. They were recorded. They stayed. They didn't go out of the tent, and they started to sprout some kind of nevuah. Vayaretz ha'na'ar vayagid l'Moshe, right? The na'ar went and told Moshe and said, "Hey, Eldad u'Meidad misnaben b'machaneh." Vayan Yeshua ben Nun misharis Moshe mibchura vayomar Adoni Moshe kla'im. Okay, what should I do? How do we tackle the situation? Should I lock him up? Says Moshe. Says Yehoshua. So Moshe answers, Remember Moshe hamakane atemli, atali umi yiten kol am Hashem nevim ki yiten Hashem esrucho aleihem. So those are the psukim. Now we read them all the time. The Gemara actually darshans what exactly went on, because, like I said before, this is a very enigmatic episode where we don't really concentrate on. We all know the names Eldad and Meidad, but we don't really know what happened. So thankfully, the Gemara is going to shed light on exactly what happened. So getting back to Daf Yud Zayin, now that we know the psukim, Yesh Omrim bekalpe nishtayru. Okay, when it says that the 2 people remained in the camp, okay, it means that they were left out. They were excluded from those selected from the Kalpi. The Kalpi was a box that had like raffle tickets, okay? And each ticket had a name on it. So they were left out of the box. Please explain. Shebeshasha Amar La Kadosh Baruch Hu Moshe. The Gemara continues, because when God told Moshe, "Esvel Lishivim Ish Meziknei Yisrael," Amar Moshe Ketzad Aseh. Okay, you're telling me to pick 70 people. Okay, 70 is a number that is hard to get to. Why? Because Moshe said to himself, I have to be fair. And I know that there's 12 tribes. So if I do 70 divided by 12, I'm left with a fraction. So that's a problem. So Evchor, Shisha, Mikol Shevet, Veshevet, Nimtza, Shnaim, Yiseirim. If I do 6 times 6, 12 times, I have 72. So I can't do 6 apiece. Evro Chamisha Chamisha Mikol Shevet Veshevet Nimtza Sarah Chaserim. If I do 5 times 12, then I'm down to 60. So the number is somewhere between 5 and 6. So Evro Shisha Mishevet Zeh Chamisha Mishevet Zeh Hareini Matil Kina Ben Ashvatim. So what's my option? To split the baby and do some 5 and some 6. Then I have jealousy between the Shvatim. So he didn't know what to do. By the way, there's a side question I saw in the Ben Yehoyada. He says, well, why didn't they just do 12? And then on each 12, it told you either 5 or it told you either 6. So if you were so each Nasi would pick 1. And if, let's say, Reuven picked 5, then Reuven was responsible for getting 5 people. Okay, it's a question and there's a long answer to it. But anyways, the point is nothing is simple. So Maaseh. So what did Moshe end up doing in the end? Birer Shisha Shisha.
There's another question. Why didn't Hashem just say 72? Why do you have to say 70?
Okay. There's a concept of 70. 70 is a mystical number for all those mystics out there.
Because it says 70 here. It could have said 72.
Yeah.
And 72 would be a mystical number.
No, that's not how it works. You can't back into it. It's not fair. I think JJ will back me up on that. Anyways, so what do we do? Okay, so how do we solve this math problem? So birer shisha shisha, vehevi shivim ushnayim pitkin. So he said, okay, we'll do 6, but as we noted, we're going to have a problem with 2 of them. So let's do the old earn, right? Al shivim kasav zakein ushnayim hini yachalak. So 70 pieces of paper had the word zakein. 70 had nothing. Balalan v'nasan b'kalpi, mixed them up, right? He put them in a box. Amar lahem ba'u tlu pitkechem. Go and draw. Everyone draw one. Kol mi sha'ala biyado zakein, amar kvar kitcha shamayim. So everyone started to draw. And whoever got a zakein, Moshe said, you are already holy. Okay. Oh, okay, very good. And Misha Allah biyado chalak, and the person who got a blank, hamakom lo chafetz b'cha ani ma'asalach. He says, you lost. You know, at the end of the day, Moshe said, this is all divine. So, you know, I could either tell you, or you could look at it yourself and just, you know, chalk it up to bad luck. But if you got a blank one, it just means that it just wasn't meant to be. Now, that's what the Gemara says. Rashi says something very interesting. You have to open up the Rashi over here. Rashi says, so Lamaisa, because the Gemara now is going to segue to something completely different about how this box, this lottery system was used once before. Okay, but before we get to that, Rashi says something revolutionary that's not in the Gemara. He says, "Rushnai ma'osan shivim shahalchu litol ala biyado chalak." So what ended up happening? So Eldad and Meidad went last. Okay, so again, there were 72 people. So 70 people line up and they pick. Okay. But two of the first 70, we don't know who their names are, but two of the 70 got blank ones. So there were two left over, but nobody picked them. Eldad and Meidad didn't draw lots. Because they thought that the first 70 all had zakains. So they're like, what's the point? Right? I don't want to get a losing one. So that's what it means that they were left over. Right? Because there has to be some kind of leftover here. Because that the Gemara started off by saying, what does it mean, nishtairu? What does it mean that they were left over? So that's how this part at least ends. Again, Rashi says, Shalo halchu lito shenisyaru shalo yale biyadan chalak. They didn't, right? Because they thought that the first 70 were winners and they didn't want to be losers. Little did they know that two of them were already losers and they were bound to be winners if they just would have chosen, but they decided not to choose. So that's a very, very important Rashi. So before we continue the story, it wouldn't be fair to discuss the question of who exactly were Eldad and Meidad, right? They were certainly what we call today one-hit wonders. They make one appearance and one appearance only, all right? So if that's true, wouldn't it be nice to know who these people were? So if you actually look at it, there are three sources that at least I was able to see. One is the Medrash Tanchuma. Let's start off by saying the Medrash Tanchuma, because the Medrash Tanchuma actually complicates matters. The Medrash Tanchuma says, it's a long Medrash, it starts off by quoting our Gemara, where there was, Moshe wanted to know, do I do 6, do I do 5? So it says he took 70 pitkin and he wrote Zakein. Okay, then the Medrash says, Natal Shivim Pitkin Halakin V'tarfan V'nasin Bakalpi. Just to show you that nothing is, unanimous. This Girsa says that he took 70 more that were blank. So each one had a 1 out of 2 chance of picking the word Zakein. Okay, so that's what this Girsa says. And he says, Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Amrlo Rab Nechemia, so Rab Nechemia argues and says, Adayin hi machlokas b'davar. Sheyachol lomer lo ein kan petak echad kasuv bo zakein. Sheilu hayasham yad haya ola biyadi. V'heyachasa, Rab Nechemia kachasa Moshe. He says, no, what he did was he took like our Girsa in Agamara. He says, Natal shivim ushnayim pischen. He took 72, and on 70 he wrote zakein, and 2 were left blank. So that's more like we got. Anyway, that's what the Medrash says. And everything is fine and dandy. And toward the end of the Medrash, the Medrash says, by the way, Eldad, who Eldad ben Kislon, Meidad ze Kumuel ben Shiftan. Hazakenim lo nisparshu shmosan. We all love to know names of people, right? We're very inquisitive. We don't know who the Zakenim are, and we barely know who Eldad and Meidad are. But if you remember, at the end of Parshas Maseh, right after the Chalukas Haaretz, right, where it talks about, in Perek Lamed Daled, where it talks about the borders of Eretz Yisrael, it gives you new Nesiim, right? Because remember what happened to the old Nesiim? The old Nesiim didn't make it. So who are going to be the princes? Who are going to be the Nesiim of these Shvatim that were inevitably going to cross the Yarden? And if you look in the Psukim, one of them was from Shevet Binyamin. His name was Eldad ben Kislon. Okay, I think he was from Binyamin. And Meidad, Zekumuel ben Shiftan, he was from Shevet Ephraim. So according to the Medrash, Eldad and Meidad make another appearance as Nesiim. Okay, so that's one opinion as to who Eldad and Meidad were and who they became. Okay, ready for this? I couldn't believe this till I saw it. I'm going to read from My favorite interpretation, Targum Yonasan ben Uziel. V'ishtayru train guvrein b'mashrisa. Two men remained in the camp. Shma dechad Eldad, ushmei detanin Meidad. And the second one was Meidad. Who are these people? Bino de Eltzafan bar Parnach. Diyaldet le Yocheved bras Levi. Bisman de patre Amram Gavra v'isnabas le adolo yoldidas as Moshe. Ready for this? Eldad and Meidad were the sons of Elitzafan bar Parnach. Who was that? So in that same list, he's also a Nasi. Okay, anybody know what Shevet he's from? For $100? Okay, no guessers out there. He was from Shevet Zvulun. The Nasi of Zvulun gave birth to Eldad and Meidad. Okay, but if you were following in that complicated Aramaic, you would have understood that he came from Elitzafan ben Parnach, who was married to Yocheved. Wow, how was he married to Yocheved? Because Yocheved was the daughter of Levi, who was married to Amram, but they got divorced. Remember the story in Parsha Shmos? Rashi discusses Vayelech ish beis Levi. They were divorced, and Yocheved, after she got divorced, she gave birth to, right, obviously after Moshe, right, because that's the whole story, is that, if you remember that Miriam said, you got to get back, whatever, that whole,
Not after Moshe, after Aaron.
that's what I meant. Thank you.
But then
After
she went
Aaron,
back, so he was not able to marry her. Amram couldn't have married her.
So hold your horses.
I'm
So
holding.
the Yonasan ben Uziel says, Bisman de patre Amram Gaber v'itznabasle adoloyel de'asiadz Moshe, and she gave birth before she gave birth to Moshe. Okay, that's what the Yonasan ben Uziel said. That who was the mother? Eldad and Meidad came from Yocheved. So at the end of the day, they were Moshe's half brother. That's fascinating. Now, the Ksava HaKabbalah says, what? Are you kidding me? That makes no sense. By the way, I'm reading from the Ksava HaKabbalah. Ubemincha blula kasav matzati ki chacham echad meretz Yisrael kasav lorav Amram labavel shira kever shekasav alav Eldad umeidad. If anybody out there wants to visit, when they do their Kvarim tour, the Kvarim of Eldad umeidad, their Kvarim are known to some people, right? Because it says on their tombstone, Eldad umeidad achei Aaron min ha'ev v'lo min ha'em. Okay? They're brothers to Moshe, but only from the father and not from the mother. So we just said it's the opposite, right? According to Yonasan ben Uziel, they're brothers from the mother's side, not from the father. And what's the proof that they're from the father's side? The Eldad taimo, because of the word Eldad. Eino ben Yocheved dodato, umeidad no tarikun mihi dodati. The word dad could mean aunt or uncle. So al means no, dad. He's not my uncle, right? Eino ben, right? This is not my aunt. This is not from my aunt. This is, right? Or Meidad. Because what's the story? The story is after Matan Torah, the Jews got this concept called arayos. Okay? If that's true, this is exactly the opposite of Yonatan ben Uziel. When did this whole story take place? This whole story took place in the year after Matan Torah. Remember, Bahaloscha is 1 year after Matan Torah. And Matan Torah, Moshe was 80. Okay? So what are you telling me? You're telling me that Matan Torah happened, and right before Matan Torah, um, these two babies were born. Karov Lishnei Shanim, right? Eldad and Meidad, according to the story, if you're right, were 1 year old at the time because it happened right before Matan Torah, right? That was when, right? That was when the divorce was. So this really doesn't make much sense, says Aksava HaKabbalah. So therefore, there has to be an alternate pshat. And the alternate pshat comes from the Das Zakenim. The Das Zakenim Mibale Tosfos says that Eldad Meidad, Klomar, Bumatati Bekuntrus, right? So he brings down Eldad Meidad Ache Moshe Hayu. Eldad and Meidad were the brothers of Moshe, Ki Kishinitna Torah V'Nesrol Harayos, Pirshu Kulam, as we just said. Shinem Areish Moshe Sa'am Bochel Mishpachotav. We spoke of that a few months ago. Al Iske Mishpachosav. Everyone started crying because they realized that this concept of incest wasn't really going to be permitted anymore. So they were all upset. They liked it the old way. V'gam Amram Avi Moshe Pirish Mi Yocheved. Amram also divorced from Yocheved. V'nasa Isha Acheret remarried another woman. Behold Mimena Eldad Umeidad. And then, so really Amram was their father. So Moshe was their half brother from the father's side. Very nice. Okay, and then he brings down the Medrash that maybe it was Elidad ben Kislon or Kemuel ben Shiftan. Either way, if you want to visit them, they are in the biblical city. They're buried. I looked it up. They're in the city of, remember, Ashtaros Haidrei? So they're up in the cities of Og, next to the Golan. That's where, in the city of Edrei, that's where the cave where Eldad and Meidad are buried. Okay, so that's some interesting trivia on who Eldad and Meidad actually were. But let's get back to the end of Sanhedrin Yud Zayin, because the Gemara went on a little bit of a tangent and said, okay, who exactly are these people and what happened? So the first opinion is that they were left out of what? They were left out of the box. Okay, and the Gemara goes on to say that there's another story when it came to the 5 shkolim, right? If you remember the story where the Levium became Kadosh, they replaced the Bechorim. There were 273 extra, right? There were 273 Bechorim, okay, over the number of Levium. So you had to take 273 times 5. So each one knocked out the others. Each 22,000 Levium knocked out were poda themselves with a Bechor. And what about the fact that there were 273 extra Bechorim? Right, so they did the same thing. How do we know which one had to pay 5? And how do we know just how to find a local Levi? So they put their, I guess that had to be a big box, right, for 22,273. Actually, I'm sorry. There were only 273 in the box. Okay. Anyways, so the Gemara has a similar situation about that. But now, the punchline of this Gemara is Rab Shimon Omer b'machaneh nishtayru, that the truth is they weren't left out of the box. They decided not to be included, not because they were scared, but because they were modest. So therefore, they remained in the camp. They didn't want to even partake in the lottery because they were modest. And Bishasha Amalo Kadosh Baruch Hu Moshe Esfali Shivim Ish, when God said to Moshe, Esfali Shivim Ish, Amru Eldad Meidad Ein Anu Ru'uyin La'oso Gedula. We are not Ru'ui to be included in the Zakenim. So Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, so God answers, Ho mi'atatem atzmachem hareinu mosif gedula al gedulaschem. Because you decided to decrease yourself. Okay, this is kind of like the story with the moon, right? I am going to make you great. Uma gedula hosif lahem, shahanavim kulam nisnabu pasku, because all the Nevi'im, once they prophesied, they stopped. Vehem nisnabu velo pasku. They prophesied and they did not stop. Uma nevua nisnabu, and the Gemara ends off by saying, okay, so what did they actually do? So Amru, so they said, Moshe Mace, the Yeshua machnis es Yisrael la'aretz. Okay, they predicted what was going to happen. That Moshe was going to die, Yeshua was going to take over, bring them over the Yarden. Abachanan mishum Rabbi Lezer, al iske slav hen misnabin, ali slav. They prophesied about the Slav that were going to come, because again, what's the context of this whole story? Again, that ties back to this whole discussion about Parshas Bahaloscha, how it's a very weird and scattered parsha with things all over the place. And this is plopped in right between the complaining, the episode by Kivra Sataiva, right? I'm sorry, of Tavera, and then comes the Slav. So they actually predicted that Slav were going to come. And they said, Ali Slav, arise, Slav, arise, Slav. And then they were right on their prediction, because a few psukim later, it says that Slav did come. And the last opinion as to what they actually did, what they prophesied about, Rav Nachman Amar, Aliske Gogu Magog Hayu Misnabin. They were being misnabe on the battle of the Moshiach. Shenemar Ko Amar Hashem Elokim Ha'atahu Asher Dibarti Biyamim Kadmonim Biyad Avadai Nevi'ei Yisrael Hanivnim Biyamim Hahem Shanim Lahavi Otcha Alehem. Al Tikre Shanim Ela Shnayim. Okay, this is a pasuk in Yecheskel, which is, I think, right before the dry bones, or maybe it is actually the dry bones parak. It's either that or right next to it. Yecheskel 38, where it says that I spoke, right, that through my avadim, the prophets, and through the prophets of Israel who prophesied for many years. Okay, and it says shanim. Don't read shanim, but rather shnayim. Two people who are prophesizing about Gog and Magog, and who were those? The Eluhen Shnayim Nevim Shenisna Beperek Echad Nevuah Achas, who actually prophesied. They are Habe Omer Eldad Meidad. Okay, it's interesting. Getting back to Yonasan ben Uziel, if you look in his commentary, he actually says that we have three opinions in the Gemara about what they said. One of them was about the Slav, one of them was about Moshe, and one opinion was about Gog and Magog. So Yonasan ben Uziel says Eldad was one opinion, Meidad was a second opinion, and both together were prophesizing about Gog and Magog. So the Yonasan ben Uziel actually kind of puts it all together. So that's all I wanted to say about that. So we have some kind of idea and source of where this whole concept of 70 came from, where we see it in Bahaloscha, how that ties back to Pashas Mishpatim and Matan Torah, why we needed Zekanim. And it's good once in a while when we're learning Daf Yomi to actually remember some Torah Shebechsav once in a while. So I'm a big fan of that, to actually know Pashat Pshat. So I want to, in the last 15 minutes, I'm not going to do the justice. I wanted to talk a little bit about Kiddush HaChodesh, because we spent a lot of time in the first parak talking about Ibor Shana, right, on Daf Yud Gimel, Yud Dalet or so, where it talked about how many judges you need for Kiddush HaChodesh and Ibor Hashana. So just on the topic of Ibor, just as like a little bit of an introduction, the pasuk is HaChodesh Hazalachem Rosh Chodashim. Okay, that is the source where we know that it's the moon, in fact, that sets the month, as opposed to January, February, March, which are exactly 30 days or 31 days. And it doesn't really matter if we see the moon, because after all, the solar calendar, that's why we call it the solar calendar and not the lunar calendar. And really the first, not the first time, but the one of the Gemaras that talk about the original first Kiddush HaChodesh is in Menachos. It says that Moshe couldn't understand this concept of molad, right? If you thought that you didn't understand what a molad went when they announce how many halakim, right, on Tuesday morning, Jerusalem time, the molad's going to be, right? Moshe didn't understand it either. So you're in good company. In fact, he needed God to actually show him with a finger, right? It says there were a number of items. It said that Moshe couldn't understand the Chatzi Shekel, whatever that means. He couldn't understand the menorah. He didn't understand Traphus, right? There's I think one other that Moshe didn't understand, and God showed him with a finger. And the Gemara says, "Heralo Hakadosh Baruch Hu Moshe b'mare hanavua dumus levana v'amarlo kazera kadesh." Okay, and it says that God showed him the moon as it was in its chiddush stage, right when it was at the molad stage. Okay, so here we learn that this starts the new calendaric month. Okay, but as we know, that what actually is Koveya the Chodesh is when Bezdin says the magic words of Mekudesh Mekudesh, and that's what we call to be Mekudesh al Pi Re'iyah. Okay, and the Rambam basically explains in his introduction, he says, Ein Re'iyas Hayareach Mesura L'chol Adam, Kumo Shabbos Breish Yishakol Achad Mona Shisha V'Shoves B'Shvi. The week is the easiest thing. Anyone can figure it out. Sunday to Friday night, it's automatic. You don't need to see anything. You could be locked up in the basement. You know that you have 6 days and the seventh day is Shabbos, regardless of what happens in the world, right? However, when it comes to Rosh Chodesh, it says, "Chodesh hazeh lachem, edu zeh tihei mesur lachem." You are in control of Rosh Chodesh, as opposed to the 6 days that you're not in control of anything. Okay, that's automatic. You guys, you Jews, are in control of when the moon starts. So what is the month all about? We know that we know that a month is 29 and a half days and 793 halakim. Halakim are, you want to know the exact number, there's 1,080 halakim in an hour. So it's the ratio of 793, or I should say of 1,080 divided by 793. And there you have your 29 and 5/8, we'll call it, days in a month. So that's why sometimes we have 29. We have, in a perfect year, we'll have 6 29s and we'll have 6 30s. And when you add 6 times 29 plus 6 times 30, you get 354 days. Okay, so that's a little bit of an introduction. And the pasuk that we learn it from is Shmos Yud Beis, HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem Rosh Chodashim. Okay, now this pasuk is, or I should say, was made famous by Rashi. What does that mean? The very first Rashi that everybody learns in Cheder is the Parsha in Parshas Bereishis. Is why does it have to say or start off by saying Bereishis bara Elokim? Shouldn't the first mitzvah, because this book is all about mitzvos, why do I need history? Let's just start from the mitzvos. And the very first mitzvah, even though it's not really the first mitzvah, that itself is a discussion, but the really first Mishnah is HaChodesh Hazeh. Okay? And if you look in, we don't have that much time left, but I'll do a few of the sources. Okay, one is from, as we always do, we're going to do the Chinuch, because the Chinuch gives a really nice nutshell version along with a reason of why this mitzvah exists and what is it all about. So Sefer Chinuch number 4, if you're counting at home, This is mitzvah number 4. Mitzvahs kiddush hachodesh, l'kadesh chodashim u'la'aber shanim bebezin gadol, v'chachma samuch ba'aretz. So he packs a lot of information, does a Sefer Chinuch, in the very first line. Why? Because he says you have to do kiddush hachodesh, and then he throws in u'la'aber shanim. Now you remember on Daf Yudalit, I think, where it talked about what are some of the reasons why we have to make an extra adar. If we figure out, based on the meteorologists, that it's going to be a cold Pesach, right? And we need to add another month. Or if Sukkot is not going to be falling out in the equinox, right? Or, right, at the end of September. Or all of these things, or the fruit isn't ripe, or the harvest isn't on time. All of these reasons is what we call ibur shanim. Today, we don't do it anymore because Hillel set it in motion that we do it on the average every 2.8 years, right? Or 7 out of every 19 years. That, of course, is the famous 19-year cycle, which coincidentally, or not so coincidentally, is the answer to the trivia question, why is my birthday and why does my Hebrew birthday and my English birthday have a 75% chance of coinciding every 19 years? Okay, that's the reason why it happens. The reason why it's not 100% is because there are years when Cheshvan and Kislev switch off 29 and 30. So you don't have a perfect sequence of 19 years. You may be off by maximum 1 day. But over a span of a lifetime, you're guaranteed to have assuming you live to be 72 years, you'll have at least 3 times where your Hebrew birthday and your English birthday will be on the same day. Okay, so getting back to the chinuch, he includes Ibur Shanim as part of this mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh, which is not so pashut because we're not going to get to it, but the Ramban does not agree with that. So just to let you know, and what you're doing when you do this Kiddush HaChodesh, you're not just sanctifying the moon, you're not just creating a month. What you're doing, which is an unbelievable concept, I shouldn't say the word unbelievable, it's underrated. It's so underrated because in today's day and age, we know we get a calendar in the mail. It says, and you open it up, and you're like, okay, today, right? And you look, when is Labor Day? So you go to September, and you say Labor Day is Monday, September 4th. Come hell or high water, it doesn't matter what happens in the world. Labor Day in 2025 is going to be this day, and there's nothing we could do about it. Okay, this concept didn't exist 2,000 years ago because there was no calendar that came from your day school in the mail. Because we create the calendar. As we go along, we, so to speak, we play it by ear. We don't know yet. We couldn't plan Pesach vacations. We can't plan airline tickets. We can't plan anything because we don't know when it happens. And sometimes we don't even know when Rosh Chodesh happened until a day later. We're like, oh, yesterday was Rosh Chodesh and we didn't wear blue and white to school, right? That's a problem because we can't send out emails reminding, right, the students that tomorrow's Rosh Chodesh because it was in our control. It was either on day 29 or it was on day 30, and that's it. But it was a 1 in 2 chance. You didn't know until it was over. And the same is true why, Pesach, we didn't know until sometimes it was too late, right? The Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, if you remember, talks about they would send messengers and it took 14 days and they'd get there just before Pesach. So this whole concept of preparing and knowing where you're going to be for the Seders and this and that and travel was completely foreign. And it's just unbelievable to think that that actually existed once. I'm a little jealous. There's a lot of, like anticipation when you don't really know, when things are going to happen. Today, we have a calendar on our phone that gives us everything for the next, 9 million years. Then it was a little bit different. So that is what the Chinuch says. Achodesh zelachem rosh chodeshim klomer shetiru chidush shel levana tikbu lachem rosh chodesh o afilu lo tiru, even if you don't see it. Mekiven shehi ru'ui leheros al pi hacheshbon hamakubol, even if you don't see it, but because Hillel was set up this thing called the cheshbon, he set the watch, right? Sometimes you have a watch that could last for 600 years, right? Right? You have to wind it once a week, but once you wind it, you're set for a very, very long time. That's exactly what Hillel accomplished. Okay, v'chen tichlol mitzvah zu mitzvahs ibor shana, and you're going to include in this mitzvah number 4 of a chodesh hazeh also ibor shana lefi sheyisod mitzvahs kiddush hachodesh kadei sheyasu Yisrael moadei Hashem b'moadam, as we spoke about. It's not just knowing when Rosh Chodesh is; it's knowing that because today is Rosh Chodesh, Sukkot is going to be in 15 days from now. So this is your warning. Pesach is going to be in 15 days from now. So this is your warning. Okay? U'kumoken mitzvos ibor hashana zeh miyesodhi. V'ulam milvad zeh hamikra bo ha'aros b'ksuv ha'torah yorah al mitzvos ha'ibor v'chule v'chule. I just want to read in the few minutes we have left the reason. Misharshe mitzvah zu k'dei sheyasu Yisrael moadei Hashem bizmanam. Again, the function, this is not just, there's no deep philosophical reason as to why there's Kiddush HaChodesh. It's more of a practical, which is what? To know, as I just said a minute ago, when the holidays are going to occur. Because you have to do Pesach when the Tvua is in bloom. And you can't have Pesach in the middle of February. And that's what ends up happening if you don't adjust the calendar 11 days every 3 years on the average. You'll have it in the heat of you'll have it in July and then August, right? Like Ramadan. That's why Ramadan changes every year, because the Muslims don't follow the solar calendar. They don't have to have Ibor Shanim. They don't really care when Ramadan happens, right? Unlike us that have to have it in the correct season. V'chag ha'asef tkufas hashanim ve'ululei ibor hashanim yava'u hamoadim shalo bizmanim elu. Lefi sheYisrael machashvin chodsheihem u'moadehem limos shana halavona. We are all about lunar. Shehen shunnan 354 days, chet shot, okay, and 750 chalakim, okay, v'hi chaser mishnah sachama yud yomim. The difference between, it's not exactly 11, it's 10 and 15 sixteenths. Okay, not really important. So the opinion of the Sefer HaChinuch is more of a function. I just want to end off in the last minute by quoting the famous Sforno. The Sforno comments on a Chodesh Hazeh, and he says, let me find it. Oh, by the way, the Ramban talks about where we got the names of the months from. Okay, if we had 2 hours, we'd go into much more depth that I have over here. But just to give you a Sforno. HaChodesh Hazeh lachem. Okay? The Sforno picks up on the word lachem. What do you mean to us? Why is this to us? Mikan ve'elech yihu hachadashim shalachem. From here on in. What do you mean here on in? Again, where is Shmos Yud Beis? Shmos Yud Beis is right after Makas Bechoros, when we were told that we're leaving Mitzrayim. So we're going to become a new nation. What's the first thing we have to do? We have to know when our holidays are. We have to know when to eat, right? So therefore, what are we given? We're given the mechanism to figure out when our holidays are going to be. So this is your month, Lachem, to do as you like. Lasos bahen kirtzonchem. Organize your own calendar, right? God says, knock yourself out. Aval bimei hashibud. How about before HaChodesh Hazeh? Before Shmos Yud Beis, what did we have? We had really bad times. Aval bimei hashibud lo haya yumechem shalachem. Your days weren't yours. Aval hayu la'avodas acherim urtzonam. You had no retirement package yet because you were subjugated to the Mitzrim. So therefore, you had no ratzon. Your time wasn't yours. Your time belonged to someone else, right? And you see where he's going with this. Right? Because after you became free, now your time, your hours, your minutes, your seconds are now yours, as opposed to when you're working on someone else's clock, right? When you're subjugated, your time is not yours because you have to listen, and you are like, I don't say above time, but time wasn't relevant to you because it was being monitored by someone else. The ultimate level is when time is yours and you decide. And how do you decide your time? You decide your time by the fact that we were given the power to create months. And if you remember, the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah says, Mikrai Kodesh, Al Tikra Otam Ela Atem, Atem Afilu Shogigin, Atem Afilu Mizidin. We create when Rosh Chodesh is, even if we make a mistake. That's how powerful this concept of us creating time, as opposed to, if you remember what the Chinuch said, that the Sheshis, right, the 6 days of the week, there's nothing we could do about it. Whether we like it or not, there's going to be 6 days that are 24 hours, and then you have Shabbos. You could do anything you want, but you can't stop that process from going about. The only thing that is in your is creating this concept of Pesach, of Sukkot, of Shavuos, of the Shalosh Regalim, and that is really in our control. Much, much more to say. Maybe next time I'll bring up some more sources, but that'll be it for tonight.